Tuesday, 5:37 a.m. The sky hadn't fully brightened yet, but a light layer of mist had already crept across the glass of the 23rd floor office at Jennings Foundation. A building with no CEO name on display, no portraits of leadership, and not a single sign that its founder had once been one of the most influential figures in private philanthropy. But on the dark wooden desk, next to a cactus that had yet to bloom, there was one item that made everything freeze for a moment. A wrinkled envelope, no stamp, no address, only two pencil-written lines. To the founder, my name is Zoe. I don't know who you are, but if you're good, you'll read this letter. Caleb Jennings held the letter as if it weighed more than the 100 financial reports stacked on his desk. No one had called him by that real name in years, ever since he withdrew from the media, erased his name from the founding documents of Horizon Home, and left the spotlight to the executives and operations specialists. To the outside world, Horizon was a modern advanced childcare system, proudly promoting the slogan, "Raising Future Leaders." To donors, it was a place where orphans were trained in life skills, nurtured holistically, and guided toward college, tech, and the arts. To the government, it was the most successful public-private partnership model in the child welfare sector. But Caleb knew that the more loudly something was praised, the easier it was to hide what needed scrutiny. He opened the letter. Inside was a piece of notebook paper, folded in thirds, with creases and a smudge of blue ink in the corner. The first lines appeared, scribbled and uneven, but something in them made his chest tighten. My name is Zoe. I'm 9. I don't know who the founder is. Here, people call me B3 Girl, or the kid who asked too many questions. But I just want to ask one last time. Does anyone at Horizon actually listen? Caleb didn't react immediately. He set the letter down and walked toward the window. The morning was still dim, but the buildings in the distance had begun to light up. He leaned his forehead against the glass, recalling something he had long packed away, buried deep beneath years of accomplishments. The memory of his very first night at Horizon Home, Cedar Ridge Branch. Back then, his name was Caleb Miller. 6 years old, no mother, no father. No one had spoken his name in the 2 months since the accident. He was brought to the home on a rainy night, still wearing the shirt stained with the dried blood of the stepfather who had beaten him. No one hugged him. No one asked questions, until an elderly woman, Mrs. Darlene, knelt down and handed him a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. She said, "If you don't know what to say, write it down. Here, paper and pencil won't hurt you." That was the first time in his life Caleb wrote, "My name is Caleb," and someone kept that paper all the way until the day she passed. Now, more than 30 years later, another child was whispering, not to get an answer, but to be acknowledged. No one writes a letter in pencil unless they're afraid of being found out. No one uses torn notebook paper unless it's the only thing available inside a facility. Caleb returned to his desk and read on. The handwriting was smaller now, shakier. "I'm only writing this once. If nobody answers, I won't write again. There are cameras here. There are attitude scoreboards. There are pictures of us online, smiling. But after the smiling, we go back to our rooms and no one calls us by our real names. I remember mine, but I'm scared I'll forget it one day." He folded the letter. No assistant call, no email, no system audit. He picked up his phone and opened an old contact list, titled Darlene's List, a list she once used to record staff members she trusted enough to care for kids. Among them, only one still worked at Cedar Ridge, a janitor named Myra, noted as reliable, doesn't use email, but remembers every kid's name. Caleb sent one short message. "I need to talk, not over the phone. Meet at the old parking lot. Tell no one." That afternoon he arrived. Myra looked the same. Silver hair, trembling hands, worn shoes. But her eyes hadn't changed. She didn't ask questions. She simply looked at Caleb and said softly, "I knew one day you'd come back. Something's not right at Cedar Ridge. I've seen it, but I have no power." Caleb didn't reply. He just handed her the letter. Myra read it silently, tears rolling down her hands. She nodded. "Zoe, that girl writes beautifully. Every time she writes something, I keep it. But I can't keep it long. They check drawers. They told me not to give the kids false hope. You want to go inside? Caleb nodded without a word. What name are you going in under? Myra asked, eyes sharp. Caleb answered without hesitation. Electrician. I still remember the original schematics. No one remembers how to connect the upper level to the mental care wing. I'll enter through the maintenance basement. Myra gave a faint chuckle. The founder has to sneak in through the service hatch. Horizon really has changed. She pulled out a silver-gray uniform, the type worn by repair staff during periodic inspections, and handed it to Caleb. I've kept this since you were that mop-headed kid hiding in the closet. Put it on. Enter through the back door. But be careful. Madison's in charge now. She doesn't like strangers. The name Madison made Caleb pause. He'd seen it in a report 3 years ago. The person praised for increasing sponsorships through brand enhancement of the orphanage. At the time, he had doubts, but he trusted the oversight system. Now that very person was the one Zoe lived with every day. Before he left, Myra grasped Caleb's hand, looked him in the eye, her voice trembling but piercing. You can't come back as a guest. You have to walk in like a shadow. At Horizon now, only cameras are allowed to remember. People aren't. That evening, Caleb Jennings, the founder, CEO, and once the child who lived in room B3, left his office through the emergency exit. No message left. No assistant informed. No heads up. He wasn't going to run an audit. He was going to find the child who had written to him in pencil. Not everyone knows that some investigations don't start with subpoenas. Sometimes they begin with a very small question. My name is Zoe. Can you hear me? Wednesday, 8:12 a.m. The sky over the Cedar Ridge Highlands was gloomy, not because of clouds, but because of that faded kind of light that hangs over places long forgotten. Horizon Home, Facility 01, sat atop a lone hill, nearly a 20-minute drive from the city center, with a narrow road barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, and a gray iron gate that remained tightly shut. There were no welcome banners, no flashy logos, just a small sign to the right of the gate that read, Private Operation Zone. Please do not disturb without an appointment. Caleb Jennings approached the gate, dressed in a worn silver-gray maintenance uniform, carrying an old toolbox Myra had prepared. His cap was pulled low, his face unremarkable, even dusted with road grit. From afar, he looked like just another temporary technician called in to patch up some wiring. And that's exactly what he wanted. To blend in, to be invisible. At the gate stood a small security booth, where a middle-aged guard in uniform sipped coffee while keeping his eyes glued to the surveillance monitors. As Caleb approached, the guard didn't immediately open the gate. Instead, he stepped out with a clipboard in hand. Got an appointment? The guard's voice was dry, devoid of any social pleasantries. Caleb pulled a crumpled slip from his pocket, pretending it was an internal maintenance order. Underground electrical system. Report from last week. I was sent to verify the reconnections from the tech basement. Was supposed to be done yesterday, but they were short-staffed. The guard frowned. You're not on the list. Must be a delay in updates. I'm with an external crew, subcontracted from Jennings Energy. Caleb held up a faded ID badge. Barely legible, just convincing enough for someone who wouldn't look too closely. The guard sighed and keyed into his radio. Madison, I've got someone here. Rains. Says he's from Jennings, here to check the basement electricals. You got any confirmation on that? A woman's voice came through the radio, cold, clipped, and impatient. No appointment. No one gets in without my clearance. Turn him away. The guard turned back and shook his head. Sorry, no appointment. Caleb said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He just asked, if I came back this afternoon with confirmation, could I go in then? You'd still have to wait. This is a minor facility for underage care. We don't let just anyone through. Policy's policy. The guard wasn't hostile, just robotic. Caleb nodded, turned around, and walked slowly toward the old parking lot down the slope. There he had already prepared a Plan B, the old maintenance access point on the side of the building, connecting the central air system to the outdated drainage tunnel. A design only someone who had lived here during the early days would remember. The entryway was hidden behind an old brick wall, now covered in moss and mostly overlooked. Caleb carefully stepped through the grass behind the lot, feet crunching on old gravel now buried beneath soft earth. The very path he and Mrs. Darlene once used to sneak frightened children out to see the moon on weekend nights. As a child, that path led to freedom. Now it led to the truth. The maintenance door was stuck, but with the old key card Myra had quietly preserved from before the security upgrades, Caleb managed to open it without triggering any alarms. He entered a narrow hallway, the air thick with mold, old rubber, and scorched wiring. Flickering overhead tube lights cast a pale, jittery glow, as if he were walking through a memory not yet washed clean. He moved past the central electrical grid, dodging the rotating cameras by recalling the old placements. He had once followed a trainee tech through these halls during winter repairs. Childhood memories, especially orphaned ones, didn't just carry pain. They sometimes became maps for those who returned, searching for what was lost. After nearly 15 minutes navigating the underground corridor, he reached the staircase to the first floor, the main dormitory wing for children aged 6 to 12. He didn't ascend right away. Instead, he paused in front of an old bulletin board with faded handwriting that read, "Walk softly, speak gently. Some children need quiet to heal." Below it was a small circular symbol that Mrs. Darlene once used in place of a signature, a circle not fully closed. Caleb placed his hand on that ink mark, as if needing permission to proceed. Then he climbed the stairs, one step at a time, steady, slow, like the breath of someone about to confront a past he wasn't sure he was ready to meet. The door to the first floor opened without a sound. Before him stretched a long hallway lit by sterile white-blue LEDs, the walls repainted in pastel tones, so pristine it no longer resembled the horizon he once knew. There were no children running, no laughter echoing, only the soft sound of tiny footsteps and the voice of an adult over the intercom. 10 minutes until morning expression assessment. Please practice positive facial cues. Caleb froze. Morning expression assessment. He passed a glass window and looked into a small classroom. 6 children seated, each facing a ceiling-mounted camera, practicing smiles as an instructor coached them from an iPad. One boy frowned and was immediately corrected. No frowning. Negative expressions impact the group rating. In the corner, a whiteboard read, Donor Day, Friday. Target, 85% of children achieve high emotional index scores. Caleb turned away, his heart racing. He realized the place that once offered healing had become a stage without curtains. Before he could move far, a small voice came from behind. "Are you the electrician?" He turned. A little girl with curly hair stood in the hallway, clutching a torn notebook. Her eyes were hauntingly familiar. Not bright, not shy. Eyes of someone who had been turned away too many times to expect anything. Eyes that didn't ask. They verified. "What's your name?" Caleb's voice rasped. "Zoe!" Her voice was even, almost a whisper. Caleb nearly buckled, but he stayed calm, nodded. "What's in that notebook?" Zoe held it up. "Poems I wrote, but no one reads them, so I was going to hide them in the machine room. They don't check there much." "Why do you want to hide them?" Caleb kept his tone neutral. "Because if they see me writing stuff that's not about gratitude and positivity, they take away my paper, and my poems aren't happy." Caleb crouched to eye level. "Do you remember the last time someone called you Zoe?" Zoe hesitated. "Maybe Miss Myra, but she's not allowed in anymore. They said her cleaning wasn't up to standard." Footsteps approached from down the hall. Caleb stood quickly and whispered, "Leave the notebook here. I'll keep it safe." Zoe nodded, then walked away as if she'd never stopped. No more words, no hope, no performance. Caleb moved on toward the utility room, slipped through the side door, and collapsed onto a wooden bench. He opened the notebook. The first page held a crookedly written poem. "Will there be a day when someone asks, 'What is your name?' If they don't ask, then who am I? Am I just a barcode on a tag? Is a smile all I need to survive?" Caleb closed the notebook. He now knew what had to be done. But before taking action, he needed to prove himself, not through authority, but by being present. He sat there in the old tech room, holding the pencil Zoe had tucked into her notebook. And for the first time in years, he wrote, "I'm here, and I will not look away." Wednesday, 11:58 a.m. The sound of the lunch bell echoed from the ceiling speaker system. Not cheerful, not eager. Just a mechanical signal. steady, cold, like a shift change bell in an old factory. The first floor of Horizon Home switched into program mode. Children from classrooms rose simultaneously, formed lines, hands not held, no chatter, moving in formation toward the cafeteria. Caleb observed from a side window at the end of the hallway, hiding behind a temporarily unlocked maintenance door, opened with an old key. No one noticed the man in the silver-gray technician uniform standing silently, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect an outlet on the wall. He didn't need to listen to understand what was happening. One look at the uniform steps and bowed heads was enough to know. This was no longer a home. He quietly left the hallway, following a side path to the cafeteria, a large room repurposed from the old communal space, with ashen gray walls and framed hand-drawn pictures aligned neatly along the wall like museum exhibits. There was no savory smell of food, only the plastic scent of trays and the faint odor of microwaved industrial meals. Caleb stood in the corner, far from the food line, watching staff in beige uniforms distribute meals to the children, each consisting of a boxed lunch, a pouch of milk, and a generic white-label snack bar. A boy opened his box and frowned. Inside, the rice was dry, the chicken nuggets slightly discolored. He turned to say something, but the supervisor immediately reminded him, "Any negative reaction during meals results in a demerit. Chew quickly, no sighing." Caleb spotted Zoe sitting at a corner table beside a younger girl who seemed newly arrived. When trays were set down, Zoe looked at hers, opened the lid, inspected it, then immediately swapped it with the other girl's tray. No one made her do it. No one noticed. But Caleb saw, and his chest tightened. Zoe's tray had the only pack of chicken that wasn't spoiled. She gave it away, then quietly took a bite of the hardened bread roll, chewing while smiling. That smile wasn't bright. It wasn't to please anyone. It was the kind of smile a child learns when they realize that if they don't smile, they'll be seen as a problem. Caleb didn't blink. He'd seen that smile before, on his own face reflected in a mirror one winter day 30 years ago, eating a burnt piece of toast from the old kitchen. He remembered how Darlene had covered the mirror with her hand and said, "Don't learn to smile to avoid punishment. Learn to smile when someone understands why you want to cry." But now there was no Darlene, no one to cover the mirror, and Zoe was learning the wrong way to smile. Suddenly, the intercom came alive again. Madison's voice, the center's administrator, spoke evenly like a machine. "Reminder, all children on the first floor will participate in video recordings for sponsors after lunch. Please wash your faces, tidy up, and wear your warmest smiles. That's what everyone wants to see from our inspiring young leaders." Caleb turned and saw a group of 3 staff members setting up cameras and iPads in a corner of the cafeteria, creating a special recording zone. A pastel backdrop, clean white chairs, a large poster printed with the slogan, "Horizon, where hope begins with a smile." Each child was called, not by their real names, but by case file numbers, B3-06, A2-14, C1-22. One by one, they sat in the chair, were coached to smile, say thank you to our sponsors, and answer pre-written questions from a teleprompter board. One child slipped up and said, "We're not hungry anymore, but we get tired a lot." The camera stopped rolling. The deputy communications director stepped in, whispered something to the child, and restarted the take. The next answer was, "I love the people who helped me get a new home. I'm really happy to be here." Caleb tightened his grip on the toolbox. He realized this place no longer taught children how to hope. It taught them how to hide pain to become a symbol. Zoe hadn't been called yet. She remained seated, slowly eating the rest of her dry bread. When Caleb's eyes accidentally met hers, there was no expression, just a chilling calmness. She wasn't waiting for help. She wasn't blaming anyone. She was simply existing exactly the way the system demanded. At that moment, Madison entered the cafeteria, perfectly dressed, hair tied in a sleek bun, holding a golden clipboard, walking briskly with the poise of a 5-star hotel manager. She smiled and spoke to the deputy communications director. "Pick a few cute ones. Avoid the frowners." Last week we got complaints about off-brand visuals. Then she scanned each table, not looking at the children as people, but as products. Her gaze paused for 1 second when it passed over Caleb. Just 1 second. Then she moved on. To her, the technician wasn't important enough to notice. Caleb understood. The more invisible he was, the more he could see. And he needed to see more. He needed to fully absorb how a place once meant for shelter had become a stage, with props, actors, a director, but no real audience. After filming concluded, the children were let outside for free activity time in the courtyard. But in truth, the yard was divided into sections, and each group was restricted to a defined area. Caleb saw a group of girls passing around a comic book, but when a staff member approached, they immediately hid the book in a pocket and stood still, silent, a perfect conditioned reflex. Zoe stood alone in a corner of the yard, not part of any group. She drew on the concrete with a twig. Caleb quietly approached, standing just outside the auxiliary fence. He looked down. Zoe was drawing a circle, identical to the symbol Darlene once used. Then she added a small X in the center. Feeling eyes on her, Zoe looked up at Caleb, then bowed her head and softly said, "Someone once told me, if you see someone else who knows this mark, you can trust them." Caleb said nothing. He just nodded. And Zoe, for the first time all day, smiled without being asked. A small smile, but a real one. By the end of the day, as the children were led back to their sleeping quarters in groups, Caleb quietly returned to the old maintenance room and retrieved Zoe's notebook. He read 2 more poems. One ended with the line, "If I sleep and no one remembers I was awake, then how is tomorrow different from yesterday?" Caleb knew the time had come. He had to choose, either keep watching or start intervening. But he didn't act immediately. Instead, he opened his toolbox, took out a small voice recorder, and placed it inside the wall outlet, right where Madison usually sat during her brand strategy lunches. He wasn't looking to overthrow. He wanted to expose. With the very smiles that had been taught wrong and the very voices that had been forced into silence. Wednesday, 4:42 p.m. Caleb stood at the end of the second-floor hallway, where, for a brief and rare window of time, the security camera system was undergoing scheduled maintenance, a coincidence silently arranged by Myra earlier that morning. No one paid him any attention. A man in a silver-gray technician uniform, tool bag slung over one shoulder, clipboard in hand, just another shadow in the operational system. But this shadow was heading toward a place no one dared to name. The hallway led to the Special Behavioral Adjustment Wing, nowhere to be found on Horizon Homes' public floor plan. Even in the latest architectural blueprints, the space was labeled Old Equipment Storage. But Caleb knew the truth. Wherever you find vague names, you usually find the clearest and darkest secrets. He stopped in front of a metal door with no number, only an old electronic keypad. He entered the code, 0312, Darlene's birthday, and the door clicked open. Behind it was a narrow corridor, dimly lit in yellow, walls painted white that had faded to gray, no windows in sight. The sterile smell of disinfectant blended with the musty odor of aging carpet. A scent only those who had ever been locked inside would never forget. Tiny footsteps echoed ahead. Caleb pressed his back to the wall, peeking through a half-open door. A boy, around 10 years old, sat on the floor holding a chipped Rubik's Cube, staring at a blank white wall. No tears, no words, just staring. Next to him was a small light-up board glowing faintly, displaying the message, "Quiet mode, active, do not interact unless instructed by supervisor." Caleb gently tapped the wall. The boy turned, eyes wide, not frightened, just surprised. "What's your name?" Caleb whispered. The boy hesitated, then said, "Elijah." Caleb crouched down to meet his eye level. "Why are you here?" Elijah looked up toward the ceiling camera. It had been covered with a strip of black tape. He hesitated, then whispered softly, "I cried. In class. I miss my little sister. They said I disrupted the lesson. So they put me here to stabilize. They told me everyone has to learn to be quiet to be loved." Caleb clenched his fist. A familiar, searing feeling welled up in his chest, as if he himself were sitting there, with the broken Rubik's Cube, holding a warped definition of emotion. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I don't know. There's no clock, no calendar. When I stopped crying, they said they'll open the door." Caleb nodded and placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. Do you want to leave? The boy hesitated, then whispered, I do. But if I go out and miss my sister again, I'll probably come back. It's sad here, but at least I don't bother anyone. The answer made Caleb turn his face away, hiding his expression. He stepped out, gently closed the door, and leaned his forehead against the cold wall. The system here didn't punish children with belts or shouting. It made them believe they were the problem. He continued down the corridor and found at least 3 more rooms set up the same way. Each had a sign that read, Do not disturb during psychological intervention. Yet there wasn't a single therapist in sight. One room echoed with stifled sobs. Another was dead silent. So eerily silent that Caleb didn't dare open the door. In the last room, he saw a little girl curled up on the floor, clutching an old sweater. He couldn't bring himself to say anything. He simply stared into her eyes. The same eyes he'd seen in every child held in behavioral correction centers during his own youth. Those places didn't teach you how to be better. They taught you how to keep your wounds hidden. Caleb walked that hallway with steps heavy and slow, as if treading through a graveyard with no headstones. Each room was a burial ground of living memory, where emotions were buried in exchange for higher organizational efficiency scores. He passed by the camera maintenance room, its work order still marked as paused. The real technician had left earlier that morning, and no one knew someone was quietly walking this floor. Back in the underground utility room, where he'd been staying, Caleb opened his personal notebook. He didn't write with his hand. He wrote with the mind of someone who had once been a victim, who had grown into someone with power, and who was now face to face with the very place he once entrusted with his hopes. He wrote, They don't beat these children. They don't starve them. They simply teach them that feelings are wrong, and silence is the price of survival. Maybe that's why no one questions this system, because everything runs smoothly. No screaming, no anger, just nodding heads, and children who no longer ask for anything. That evening, during the internal staff dinner, Madison made a short announcement. The rate of undesired behaviors has dropped 17% from last quarter. That's thanks to the effective coordination of the Special Behavioral Adjustment Department. I propose we maintain the soft management model. No need for therapy. Sometimes just letting them sit quietly for long enough is enough. The room applauded. No one questioned it. No one stood to ask about long-term effects. Everyone feared risking their KPIs. Caleb was in the room at that moment, hidden under the role of a wall audio systems technician. He recorded the entire speech. Not a word was missed. After the meeting, Madison walked down the second-floor corridor and paused in front of a room. She glanced inside, tapped her fingers on the light board, and nodded. Good. No more crying. This boy'll be fine. Let's keep him in another night, just to be sure. No one wants a repeat of this morning's incident. She walked away, unaware of Elijah's eyes, watching from the crack in the door, like a shadow learning how to stay silent the right way. Caleb returned to the utility room. He sat down, played back the recording, and listened to that last line again. And for the first time since returning to Horizon, he slammed his hand against the table. Not from rage, but because he now knew the system designed to rescue had become a machine of calculated indifference. And if he didn't intervene soon, there would be dozens more Elijahs sitting in the dark, clinging to broken Rubik's cubes, waiting for their tears to dry just to be let out, thinking that was the definition of behavioral progress. Thursday, 6:27 a.m. The overnight downpour had left the air heavy and damp. Inside Horizon Home, the humidity amplified the scent of disinfectant and made the already sterile hallways feel even more washed out. Caleb stepped out of the underground maintenance room earlier than usual. He hadn't been able to sleep after replaying the recording of Madison, and after meeting Elijah, something inside him had shifted. He was no longer observing. The urge to intervene was beginning to stir. While on his way to inspect the ventilation shafts, Caleb heard a faint hissing sound near the corridor by the cafeteria. A group of 3 young girls stood lined up next to the water dispenser, but the main spout wasn't releasing water. A petite girl with smooth hair kept pressing the button, only managing to collect a few drops. Another girl gently patted her back, whispering something. The first girl tried to respond, but her voice was hoarse, distorted, like her throat had been scraped raw all night. Caleb walked over, pretending to check the wall system nearby. He listened. The girl said something like, "Yesterday, the water smelled like," but didn't get to finish before a staff member appeared and cut in. "Don't be dramatic. The water here meets standards. We tested it yesterday. If you don't want to drink, don't. But don't start disrupting the morning." The girl lowered her head and fell silent. Caleb noticed the first aid box next to the water unit had a label. "No cough medication for children under 12 without forehead temperature confirmation." He crouched down and quietly examined the water spout. The internal carbon filter had turned a deep brown, signaling it was at least 3 weeks overdue for replacement. As he began to stand, a mid-level manager, blue blouse, name tag reading Rachel, walked over. She glanced at him, then spoke softly. "This machine gets complaints all the time. But the boss hasn't approved the budget for a new filter. There's a live stream coming up. We have to keep everything visually consistent. Changing the unit would mess with the look." Caleb squinted. "So it's better to let the kids drink foul water than mess up visual consistency?" Rachel shrugged. "We don't decide what's dangerous. That's for PR and the health officer to determine." Caleb said nothing, but mentally he recorded everything. He returned quietly to the maintenance room, removed an old control panel in the electrical closet, and took out a compact device, a rapid water test meter. At noon, he returned to the hallway, posed as a technician inspecting the pipes, drew a sample from the filter spout, and fed it into the meter. The screen displayed the results. Chloramine levels exceeded safe limits, and organic contaminants were over 3 times the allowable amount for children. He snapped a photo of the screen and saved the data to a secure USB drive. He knew if he exposed this outright, they would deny it. But with a sequence of evidence, step by step, he could unmask the entire system without ever raising his voice. That afternoon, while the children attended a presentation skills class, the hoarse-voiced girl was called up to speak in front of the class. She tried to say, "I think," but her voice cracked, dry and warped, causing the room to erupt in laughter. It wasn't malicious, just shock. The teacher didn't laugh, but coldly said, "If you can't speak properly, let someone else. Why didn't you request to sit out if you were sick?" The girl bowed her head. "I did, but the nurse said I didn't have a fever, so I'm not sick." Caleb stood just outside the classroom, clipboard in hand, eyes locked on the girl's face. Her face showed no anger, no hurt, only resignation, as if the failure was her fault, for not speaking clearly enough. He walked away, went straight to the main maintenance room, citing a need to inspect the third-floor water system, and discreetly replaced the main filter in the water dispenser without any official approval. He placed a fake label on the machine. "Leak detected, emergency repair completed." He sealed the old filter in a plastic box, marked it with red tape, evidence for internal documentation. Once done, he messaged Myra, "One girl's about to lose her voice because of what we call safe water. I replaced the filter, but I need your help. How many kids have been documented with sore throats but didn't receive meds?" Myra replied with a single line, "I've kept a notebook since last year. Over 20 cases were ignored." Caleb typed back, "Send me a photo of that notebook. Keep the original safe." That evening, Caleb wrote in his journal with slow, deliberate strokes. "Sometimes a voice is distorted, not by the throat, but because no one gives you permission to use it." He closed the notebook and sat in silence in the underground utility room, where the single yellow bulb still flickered faintly overhead. He knew he was no longer just a repairman. He was now the only one here who was listening. Something Horizon had stopped doing a long, long time ago. Friday, 7:06 a.m. No rain today, but the atmosphere at Horizon Home felt fogged over. Not the clean white kind, but a heavy gray humidity that lingered after days of accumulating something no one dared to name. Caleb stepped out from the underground maintenance room, for the first time not empty-handed. In his pocket was a USB drive containing the water test results from yesterday, a photo of the deteriorated filter, and the recording of his conversation with Rachel, the manager who had inadvertently said, "The image matters more than the feeling." He knew these fragments weren't enough to shake anything, but arranged correctly, they could be the first crack in the wall of gloss, painted with flowery language. Caleb opened an old laptop and connected to Horizon's internal network using the technician's access point. His support tier login account came with limited privileges, but just enough to access internal health reports, medical logs, and maintenance records from the last 3 years. For 2 hours straight, he downloaded every relevant report. Lists of children with recurring throat infections who were never prescribed medication, flagged maintenance alerts that were ignored, and side-by-side comparisons of medical spending versus the media budget. The results were plain. The cost to replace all water filters was just 1/12 of the budget spent on the Q3 brand campaign. He saved it all onto an encrypted hard drive. One document name caught his eye. It appeared blurred. Temporary archive. Darlene's internal network. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Darlene was the only person who had ever built an informal internal archive, where she kept notes from staff feedback, former students, and even logs that administrators had tried to erase. The file was locked, but he remembered. Darlene had used the same password for all personal records, the founding date of Horizon Facility 01, 1012192. He entered it. The file opened. Before him were nearly 80 pages of notes, categorized by quarter from 2018 to 2021, the year Darlene had been relocated for health reasons. But Caleb knew the truth. She'd been perfectly healthy when she left. The only thing that had weakened was her trust in the place she'd built with her bare hands. The documents contained excerpts that made Caleb's breath catch. A young boy was placed in a quiet room for saying, "I miss my mom" too many times during reading hour. A junior staffer refused to film fake smiling scenes for a live stream and was reprimanded, later resigned. Miss Myra was disciplined for using children's real names during roll call instead of file numbers. Caleb printed a hard copy, paper, not digital. He didn't trust any drives within this system anymore. That afternoon, Caleb asked Myra to meet him outside. They sat behind the carport, where no cameras reached. Caleb placed the printed documents in her hands. Myra didn't speak. She simply nodded, then pulled out a folded slip of paper. On it, a single name. Eleanor Vicks, former head of emotional development, resigned last year. Private contact, still active. Caleb texted immediately. "Eleanor, I was the boy from room B3. Darlene taught me how to write my own name. I need to know, what happened to the emotional program?" No reply right away. Later that evening, 8:43 p.m., a message arrived from an unknown number. "I know who you are. I guessed from Zoe's poem. They erased everything, but I still have the original draft of the emotion literacy curriculum, the one Madison called Useless Weakness. If you're ready to take the next step, I'll send you everything." Attached was a photo of the cover page. "Empathy is not optional. Draft by E. Vicks." Caleb replied, "I'm not stepping, I'm running." And then he began putting the evidence together, not to leak to the media, but to confront, head-on, every link in the chain that had corroded the fire Darlene once lit. With the very fire of the children who had been taught to smile on command, he reconstructed a map of all the silent zones in the system. The utility rooms where kids were isolated, the infirmary where medicine was denied, the cafeteria where cameras recorded video but not sound. He cross-referenced internal reports with real recordings, capturing moments when Madison said, "We don't need feelings, we need results." He didn't email anyone. He printed everything, taped them piece by piece to a wall in the utility room, and at the center of that wall, he taped a photo of Darlene, holding young Caleb in the backyard of Horizon, the same photo that had once hung in the front lobby until it was removed for not matching the new brand aesthetic. Tomorrow was Saturday, the day Horizon would host its live stream event to announce the joyful summer campaign. Madison would stand in front of the cameras, flanked by a few carefully selected children, smiling as she said, "We don't just raise children, we raise the future." And Caleb would be there, not as a technician, but as someone who was once called by a number, now ready to reclaim a name for everyone who never got the chance. Saturday, 9:12 a.m. The main hall of Horizon Home, Cedar Ridge campus, was brightly decorated with a backdrop that read, "Summer of Hope, Heihan Fuchs, 2025, alongside the organization's logo in large slogans like, nurturing the future through compassion, and emotion is the foundation of success. White stage lights, 3-camera setup, every detail meticulously planned to make this morning's live stream a national branding milestone for Horizon. Madison wore an ivory dress, hair perfectly curled, makeup done with precision. She stood center stage with a lapel mic, smiling just enough, not too sweet, not too distant. The kind of smile the media team called affection balanced. Backstage, Caleb wore a badge labeled Assistant Sound Technician, standing next to the main control panel. He didn't touch the primary audio system, but had already inserted an encrypted USB into the backup visual processor. Inside the USB was a video exactly 1 minute and 27 seconds long, just enough to tear the slogan, "Nurturing Emotion," to shreds with footage that no words could excuse. The live stream began. The stage lights shifted. Madison raised her chin. Her voice flowed through the mic like pre-recorded music. Welcome to Summer of Hope, where we don't just care for children, we nourish the inner lives of the next generation. Horizon Home believes that positive emotion is the starting point for a resilient future. Caleb checked the clock. 52 seconds. Madison continued seamlessly about satisfaction metrics, about improving nonviolent communication, and a space where every child is called by name, not just a number. Caleb pressed the key. The LED screen behind Madison flickered, looked like a glitch. Madison glanced toward the tech booth, but kept speaking. Then the video began. First shot, Elijah curled up in a windowless room under soft yellow light. His voice played, small, steady. I cried. They told me I shouldn't miss my sister. Crying was a disruption. Second shot, a rusted water filter, children trying to collect a few drops. A hoarse girl's voice. I couldn't get medicine. I didn't have enough fever. Third shot, a budget chart showing media spending 12 times higher than healthcare, followed by the line, at Horizon, emotions are measured in funding ratios. Fourth and final shot, Zoe, looking directly into the camera from the utility room, whispering, My name is Zoe. My name is Zoe. I don't know if anyone's listening, but if someone once lived here, you'll understand why I wrote that letter. The background music stopped. The hall went silent. Madison froze. The cameras kept rolling. Live comments flooded the stream page. What is this? Is this real? Who made this video? Why is everyone quiet? Is this an internal leak? Why did that girl have to whisper? Caleb gently pulled the USB from the port, stepped back into the wings. No one noticed. He walked straight out the side door, down the tech hallway, heart pounding, not from fear, but because for the first time in years he felt he was speaking. Through children who had never been allowed a voice. Madison collected herself. She looked into the camera, trying to smile. We apologize, it seems the system has been tampered with. We'll investigate immediately. But the event host stepped on stage. Ms. Madison, may I ask, what was that video? Madison stammered. A technical error, unknown source. Reporters in the hall began standing up. One raised their hand. Was that footage from this very facility? If so, who is responsible for verification? Madison turned away. She had no answer. The truth was already on the screen, and for the first time in over a decade, she couldn't control the narrative. After the broadcast, media attention surged. Hashtags like Zoe is real, Shas let them speak, and Horizon Unfiltered began trending across social platforms. Viewers reshared the clip, over 2.4 million views in just 3 hours. Children at other facilities began whispering, I have a name too. I was in the room with no windows. I once wrote a letter, but no one replied. Madison called an emergency internal meeting. The communications director proposed suspending all external events. The operations chief ordered a full audit of all camera logs, but strangely, no one could identify who inserted the USB. Everyone assumed it was a disgruntled staffer or a hacker from the outside. No one suspected the quiet tech adjusting stage lights the past few days, the one who didn't appear on any official staffing list. Behind the LED wall of the auditorium, Caleb left a handwritten note taped to the equipment box. I was once a child with no name, Today, I speak for every child still being forced into silence. Below that line was an open-ended circle, the symbol Darlene once used to teach the children about things still unfinished. Caleb knew, for the first time in Horizon's history, someone didn't need to scream to be heard. They just had to put the truth exactly where it always belonged, right behind the person who claimed to speak for compassion. Saturday, 4:23 p.m. The Cedar Ridge Auditorium was empty, but the aftershock from the morning's live stream still pulsed through every wall, every mounted camera, every remaining hope banner not yet taken down. In the operations room, Madison slammed the meeting door shut. On the table lay printed screenshots of posts with hundreds of thousands of shares, quotes from Zoe, stills of Elijah, and a question now hashtagged tens of thousands of times. Who showed this to the world? Madison pointed at the tech team. Check the personnel logs for the past 3 days. I want to know who was behind the LED wall this morning. One assistant hesitated. There was a staff member with no verified ID. The badge just said Rains Maintenance Support. Not in the official personnel system. Madison frowned. Who issued the badge? No one knows. It's not part of the 2025 release batch, possibly a reprint from before. Madison scanned the room. Find something. Camera footage, signatures, shift logs, fingerprints, anything. Meanwhile, in the underground tech room, Caleb had not left. He was pinning a new scan to the wall, a screenshot of an old article from 2005, back when Horizon was still run by its original founding team. In the photo was a 6-year-old boy with messy hair, holding a name tag written in pencil, Caleb, and behind him stood Darlene, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, as if threading invisible trust through him. The photo wasn't part of any official archive, but anyone who had ever lived at Horizon remembered it. A soft knock came at the door. It was Zoe. Mr. Rains, I saw they're taking my video off the live stream, but I'm not sad. I just want to ask, were you the first one who read my letter? Caleb bent down, didn't answer immediately. Zoe continued. Yesterday, I heard Madison ask, who told her real names matter? Caleb gave a small smile. Maybe someone who was once called by a number. Zoe nodded, then turned to leave, but she left behind a note. If they make you leave, I'll keep writing. 5:41 p.m. The entire Cedar Ridge campus sat in a quiet storm. Reporters remained stationed outside the iron fence, while inside, mid-level managers spread across rooms, reconstructing every staff member's movement over the past 3 days. A select group of children were pulled aside for gentle conversations. In truth, subtle interrogations for clues about the stranger seen near the stage control panel during the livestream. In the second-floor art room, usually empty after 4 p.m., 2 boys whispered to each other, each holding a scribbled scrap of paper. One drew an open circle symbol, the other wrote beneath it, Mr. R asked my name first. No one told them to write. No one taught them to speak up. But like dust rising when a door swings open, the story of the tech who knew real names began to spread across the building within 2 hours. A student teacher named Alex overheard a girl say to her friend, if someone says your name, they're real. He froze, then messaged his ex-girlfriend, a journalist. I think someone's fixing Horizon from the inside, and the kids knew it before we did. Back in the underground tech room, Caleb hung up an old blue jacket Darlene had once left behind, with a hand-stitched phrase inside the collar. To hear, not to fix. He quietly placed a photo of a young Eleanor beside it, not out of nostalgia, but because he knew he wasn't doing this alone. At 7:15 p.m., Madison received a text from an internal number. Eleanor Vicks just appeared on the Voice for Youth podcast. She confirmed that Caleb Jennings is the one who returned to Horizon disguised as a maintenance worker. She also provided founding records and childhood photos. Madison threw her phone onto the table and called her chief legal officer. I want you to verify immediately. Does Jennings' founding equity contract still hold? If it does, I want a private meeting with the entire founding board. Tonight. No delays. 8:03 p.m. Inside a small hall that once served as the library, a closed-door meeting was held. The board members, most of whom had long stepped back from daily operations, sat around a circular table. One spoke first. If the person behind the video is Caleb Jennings, then this isn't a breach of protocol. It's a reminder of why Horizon was built in the first place. Another countered, if that's true, it's also a dangerous move that has damaged our public image. But a third member laid their hand flat on the table. No, what damaged our image is the image we created. Madison was silent. She looked at the faces of those who had once stood beside Darlene at the beginning. She realized she no longer controlled this room. No one was asking her where the video came from. They were asking, why did we need a video in the first place? As the meeting ended, one board member passed Madison and said quietly, maybe what Horizon needs now is someone to remind us what it was meant to be, and I'm not sure that person is you. At 10:19 p.m., Caleb received an anonymous email. It contained only one line. Tomorrow they'll try to silence everything, but if you're ready, we'll listen again. Sunday, 9 a.m., conference room. A3, once Darlene's office, had since been converted into a soundproof meeting room with an oval wooden table. No name plaque on the door, no cameras, no media presence. Caleb entered first, not in a technician's uniform, nor the old CEO suit, just a pale blue shirt, soft gray trousers, and an old notebook in his pocket. Madison arrived next, holding a thick stack of printed documents, her expression no longer cold, but wary. She didn't sit immediately. She stood at the head of the table. There will be no recording, no live stream, and no media or legal board present. This is an internal conversation. Agreed? Caleb nodded. I'm not here to litigate. I'm here because I once lived here. The room quieted. Madison pulled out a chair and sat across from him. So what do you want? An apology? A symbolic contract? Ownership rights? Caleb shook his head. I don't want Horizon back. I want to know, do you still remember why you joined this organization in the first place? Madison pressed her lips. I wanted to help children have a better environment. Caleb asked, and when did you forget that a better environment doesn't come from silence? Madison blinked. Caleb opened his notebook, pulled out a folded sheet, the first poem Zoe wrote. This is the first thing I received when I came back. Not a report, not a camera alert. A child handed me this, without asking me to fix anything. She just wanted someone to read it. Madison said nothing. Caleb continued, you think you're controlling a system? But what you're really controlling is the fear of being seen. No child needs a safe space if they're not allowed to exist in it. Madison responded softly, I tried to keep things calm. I've seen how chaos can ruin a child. Caleb nodded. I believe you meant well, but what's good for the system isn't always good for the person. Elijah didn't need a system. He needed someone to say, you can miss your sister and still be allowed to stay here. Madison looked down. I once admired Darlene, but she was too soft. Caleb replied, Darlene wasn't soft. She was strong enough to face what was hard to hear. You chose to mute the mic instead. They sat in silence for a long while. Finally, Madison asked, so what do you want? Me to resign? Rename Horizon after you? Caleb shook his head. I want, starting tomorrow, every facility to hang children's name tags, handwritten. I want the quiet room dismantled. I want each child to have 1 hour to speak, unscripted. And I want every new staff training session to begin with the clip of Zoe saying, my name is Zoe. Madison exhaled. You think that's enough to fix all of this? Caleb stood. Number. But it's enough to begin again. And this time, no one needs to remember my name. Just say the kids' names right. He left the room. The door closed gently behind him. Madison remained seated, her hand resting on the poem, no longer gripping the documents. She stared through the frosted window. Outside, the children were playing, not lining up, not fake smiling, just running. As Caleb passed the hallway, a board member rose from a bench. Will you come back to lead? Caleb shook his head. No one needs to lead. Someone just needs not to leave. The other man nodded, then sat back down. And in room A3, for the first time, Madison was not the one who had the last word. March, 1 year later. The air was no longer bitter cold like the year before, just a soft chill. Enough to remind people they were walking between seasons, something not hot, not cold, but filled with memory. At the Horizon Home facility in Cedar Ridge, the day began with 1 minute of silence. Not for mourning, but a new habit started by the children. A minute to listen to what your heart is saying today, a little boy had proposed during a Monday morning meeting. Strangely enough, every adult agreed. The intercom no longer played background music each morning. Instead, each week a child was selected to read aloud a quote they liked. This week, it was Nina, 6 years old, reading slowly but clearly. "I don't like when people pretend to be happy, so if you don't want to smile, just breathing is okay too." The whole system remained quiet for 15 seconds after that. Then everyone continued their work. No one corrected her grammar. No one found it confusing. They simply carried on as if they just heard something true. The poetry library, once the special behavior adjustment room, was now lit every day. No one gave rest time orders. Children came on their own, sat down and could read poems, draw, or just be silent. On each table was a small box with a note. "If you don't know what to say, write your name first. The rest, we'll find together." Myra was no longer program coordination assistant. She was the first to be appointed to a new role, listening supervisor. She had no office, no team to manage. Her job was to be present in places with no cameras, no signs. She sat by the cafeteria exit, the end of classroom halls near the poetry library, and anyone could come talk to her, or not. One Monday morning, Caleb returned to Horizon. No announcements, no official welcome. But as he stepped into the courtyard, a little girl ran up. She didn't know his name, only asked, "You're the guy who fixed the water thing, right?" Caleb nodded. She continued, "The water doesn't leak now, but lots of kids still sound scratchy because we don't say the words right. I don't know the right word, so I just sing." Caleb knelt down, asked, "So what do you want to be called when you sing?" She paused, then said, "People call me Mel, but I think my real name is Melody." Caleb nodded, then Melody. "What are you singing today?" She smiled, unclear whether it was an answer or the beginning of the song. Since the live stream a year ago, Horizon hadn't held any more media-covered events, not out of fear, but because they realized most important things happened when no one was filming. In the HR office, the new staff training manual had been rewritten. The first page no longer showed a building map. It was a blurry photo, Zoe reading a small slip of paper, with Myra standing behind her, listening. Below the photo, the first line read, "Children should never have to apologize for their feelings." April. The small trees in the courtyard had been replanted by the same children once forced to pull weeds last year. This time they chose the seeds. One group picked sunflowers. One chose lavender. A boy named Juno picked wild grass. When asked why, he said, "Because wild grass has names too. People just don't learn them." The adults in the yard laughed, not at the innocence of the words, but because something in them felt like forgiveness. Madison no longer held an executive role. She wasn't forced out. She chose to step out of the spotlight after last year's meeting. The last person to speak to her before she left was Myra. "I don't hate you," Myra said. "I just think, when someone can't hear in time, maybe it's time someone else learned to sit in your chair." Madison nodded and left her office keys. But she didn't go far. Sometimes people saw her in the old garden corner, picking up dry branches, or sitting with a group of children learning to fold paper cranes. One early summer day, a group of children held the first name calling ceremony. Not a graduation, not a ranking event. Just an afternoon where each child was invited to stand in the courtyard and say aloud the name they wished to be called. Some kept their old names. Some added their mother's surname. Some changed their names completely. Some said nothing, holding up a handwritten sign. "I don't know yet, but I'm looking." The entire courtyard applauded. Caleb wasn't there that day, but someone said that in the morning, in the old A3 meeting room, once Darlene's office, a man in a gray shirt sat by the window, placing his hand on the frosted glass. He didn't speak. He didn't look at the camera. But after he left, someone found a line delicately etched into the glass. Not bold, not colored, only visible when the late afternoon sun hit it at just the right angle. "The first place someone called me by name and truly wanted to know what I'd say back." April, 1 year after the words were etched into the glass door. On a Wednesday morning, Horizon Home welcomed a new child. There was no welcoming ceremony, no arms around his back. The boy arrived in silence, not crying, not resisting, but not speaking either. His file said his name was Daniel, but when asked, he didn't react. No head shake, no nod, just a gaze that held no anger, no sadness, more like no expectation. Myra placed him in the temporary class, sorted not by age but by observation patterns. On his name tag she wrote, "Name unknown, still myself." Everyone in the cafeteria saw it. No one corrected it. A boy named Juno whispered, "Like me before." On his first day, Daniel sat by the window. He didn't draw, he didn't read, he didn't eat. When invited to group play, he stood at the edge. Strangely, no one tried to pull him in. The children who had once been dragged in before they were ready had learned not to do that to others. That night, Zoe wrote in the listening group journal, "He's not hiding. He just doesn't need to be found yet." On the third day, Daniel wandered away from the main area. People began searching, not in panic. They knew that getting lost wasn't always being lost. Juno was the first to find Daniel sitting near a tree hollow behind the kitchen, the old staff shift change spot. He didn't run. He didn't look up. Juno didn't call out. He just sat down 3 steps away, pulled out a smooth stone and extended it, without pressure. Daniel didn't take it, but he didn't walk away either. After 10 quiet minutes, Juno said, "I used to be called the repeater because I kept echoing other people's words. Then I stopped speaking altogether. But then someone asked me, 'If you don't have your own words yet, borrow someone else's?' So I started borrowing." Daniel turned his head for the first time. Juno offered the stone again. Daniel took it, said nothing, but he gripped it gently, then placed it into his pocket. On the 5th day, Myra found a folded note on a cafeteria table. No name, just one sentence, written in short, blocky letters, no punctuation. "If I don't speak, can I still stay?" Myra pinned it to the dining hall board, right beside the weekly menu update. No one took it down. On the 10th day, Daniel joined Poetry Circle. He didn't read, but he sat with the group. When it was his turn, he passed the stone to Juno, and Juno spoke for him. Today, Daniel chooses to listen. The whole room clapped, not because Daniel spoke, but because for the first time, he stayed and let others be present with him. By June, children were painting murals across the playground walls. One group painted their names in watercolor. Another traced the hands of their friends. A little girl painted a door frame and wrote below it, "A place you can walk out of and come back to with your real name." When asked where the idea came from, she simply said, "Last time I saw a man standing at the glass door. He didn't come in, but he looked inside for a long time." Caleb no longer visited Horizon regularly, but no one believed he had disappeared. Zoe once said that on a Friday night, she heard someone turn on the poetry library light, just to replace the wall clock battery. He didn't speak, but he left a new poem on the shelf. The title was, "The Ones Who Weren't Called During Roll." No author's name. In July, Horizon held a naming ceremony, not a school opening, not a coming-of-age ritual, just an afternoon where each child could choose who would say their name, or say it themselves, or choose not to say it at all. Daniel was invited. He didn't walk to the stage, but he handed the stone to Zoe. She took the mic and read, "Today he wants to be called Still Daniel." The courtyard fell silent, then applause, not because of a twist, but because Daniel had chosen. In the reading room, a boy named Keo asked Zoe, "What do you think you'll remember most about Horizon someday?" Zoe replied, "The time I memorized the name of someone who never needed me to know it." Keo paused, then smiled. "Then I won't tell you my name. So one day you'll still have to remember me as the kid with no name." Zoe nodded. "Then I will." That weekend, at the glass door of the old A3 meeting room, someone found a new line carved beneath the first one. Not the same handwriting, uneven, but clearly done by a child. The original read, "The first place someone called me by name and truly wanted to know what I'd say back." The new one read, "Or didn't say anything, Just nodded. That's okay too. March. The air was cool, but no longer the biting cold from the days before reform. The glass walls of the Horizon Home Building, Cedar Ridge campus, no longer reflected ashen gray in the mornings, but instead caught the warm light of early spring sunshine, as if the building itself had finally exhaled after a decade-long contraction. There was no ribbon cutting, no banners, no three-page speeches. But everyone knew today was different. Not because someone new arrived, but because something new appeared. A wooden plaque was mounted next to the old utility room, once just an unused storage space. No lights, no live stream, just a single line of text. The room with no password, where stories restart. Below that, a smaller hand-carved inscription read, "For those who were once forgotten, but never silent." No one knew who put the sign there, but everyone slowed down when walking past it. Just for a second. Not out of curiosity, but because something inside told them this was a place to be left in peace. Inside the room, the walls were still covered in sticky notes, but they were no longer faded yellow. They came in shades of blue, purple, orange, red, as if someone believed memory could be recolored. A small round table sat by the window. On it lay a notebook. No fixed pen, no instructions. But every day new lines appeared. No names, no class levels. No, my name is... Just thoughts like, I don't like when people ask, why are you sad? And don't wait for the answer. I didn't talk today, but my friend stayed beside me. I could breathe better. Once someone said my name without mispronouncing it. I didn't need anything else. In the corner of the notebook was a faint pencil sketch, an open circle. No one erased it. The last page was always left blank. No one wrote on it. But sometimes someone placed a pebble, a dried flower, or a folded scrap of paper. No one cleaned it up. Myra once shared that a new boy sat silently in that room for 2 hours, then wrote just one line. I don't really get the words on these pages, but I think this room lets people breathe through feelings. He never returned to the room, but a few days later, he taped a sticky note to his own door. This is a safe place if you need quiet. In the new staff training room, the clip of Zoe saying, "My name is Zoe," was still the first thing played. No one was forced to watch, but everyone stayed until the end. Elise, a new hire, said that when she saw Zoe's soft smile, something inside her calmed. Not because Zoe said something profound, but because she wasn't trying to prove anything. She simply showed up. April, a boy named Elias wrote the first line of the week. Today, I wish people would stop calling me so good at coping. The next day, Myra printed that line and taped it next to the meeting room exit. No new slogan was needed, just one truth kept visible. Later that month, Caleb returned to Horizon, unannounced. He no longer stayed as often, but each time he came, something was always set gently back in place. That day, he visited the poetry library and left a new printout, a poem titled "A Legacy Without a Signature." No one knew if he wrote it himself or found it elsewhere. But at the end of the poem, in tiny letters, it said, "If someone has once been listened to, they'll eventually learn to listen in return." There was no Caleb. A week later, a 6-year-old girl entered the room with no password. She didn't write anything. She just sat. And when she stood, she left behind a small plastic bracelet, green, with white-out letters that read, "I don't know what I'll say yet, but I think I will." And on the final day of April, another line was discovered etched into the edge of the A3 meeting room glass, just beneath the original one. The first place someone called me by name and truly wanted to know what I'd say back. The new line, clearly carved by a small, unsteady hand, read, "Or if I didn't say anything and just nodded, that was okay too." There are people who pass through our lives without ever leaving a name, but because of them, we're called by our own name, for the first time, clearly, fully, without correction. Some words don't come with volume, don't get broadcasts, don't wear hashtags, but they shift entire systems because they're said at the exact moment someone is about to fall apart. If you've ever felt forgotten in a crowd, if you've had to stay quiet just to be easier to love, or if you've seen someone dismissed for not speaking the right way, then you already know. The world needs more rooms without passwords, where people don't inspect you. They just sit beside you. If any part of this story made your heart feel warmer, made you angry for the right reasons, or made you want to hug someone a little longer, leave a like, because maybe, just maybe, you're already helping someone else remember something they forgot. And if you believe the world needs more videos like this, quiet, real, and the kind that slows your heartbeat for just one moment, subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling stories like this one, or sit silently with you if that's what you need. See you in the next story, or maybe in the way you look at someone today.